Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of After Dark. Angel, we got bring in here.
There you go. There you go.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining.
Howdy, y'all. I'm just
acting up a little. My camera's being a little persnickety.
Yeah, and that's what you get, Justin, for getting me to set this up. I'll figure this out eventually.
Hey, Corey.
And there's a Corey. Oh yeah, need to get over to the chat. Hola.
Cletos, hello.
Ave Cletos. How are you doing, hon? Lovely echo, huh? Am I the echo? Yeah, let me turn this down. Still echoing, Cletos? Echo? Okay. I'm going to assume not. If I'm too soft to hear, please let me know. So a cool thing is that we are, the chat is going to we're both echoing? Really? Oh, that sucks. Okay.
You sound normal to me.
I sound normal to you, Justin?
Mm-hmm. How about me on the other side?
You sound normal as well. You don't sound echoey, okay. But
how do we sound, Corey? Do we have an echo?
Well, he's in the next room, so it may be.
Oh, there you go. All right.
It may be weird. Ignore you. Okay. So awesome. Yeah. So the chat's is going to something that has kind of been an aspiration of ours to be able to have everything both like archived but also accessible. So we're trying out a channel on Discord so that all of this chat basically gets archived. It can be accessed on a certain channel on our Discord. So we're still figuring that out. But I think, Justin, if it works tonight and everything is good to go, maybe we can start promulgating that and inviting people to that chat. You know, if they want access to it and stuff. I know I love that kind of stuff. I like looking over comments and my own and others and stuff. So sometimes it can be really helpful. Wow. So Corey and I just had a really powerful session over on Spaces, on the After Dark Spaces edition. And Corey, you told a story. Well, there were a number of things, but you related it. We were talking about kind of how Merick's death last episode had been. I'll have to put a spoiler in the title. That Merick's death last episode had acted as a catalyst for him, and he had a really potent reaction to it. Talked about his mom's journey and her process, and her passing and how that was for the family and all of that. And it really just, it was a really potent reminder of how powerful storytelling is and kind of why we do this, and, Corey made some really excellent observations. Like, one of them was that Merick's end was like, it exemplified the themes of the campaign, which were sacrifice and the indomitability of the human spirit, or in this case, the Kithki spirit, because there was never, like, he just kept fighting and kept fighting and kept fighting. Like, there was never a moment where he gave in to despair, that he gave in to hesitate, ever hesitated. I mean, it was on. And both Corey and I, agreed that even in these last couple of episodes, like you really saw what Merick would have looked like if he wasn't scarred, which makes his death even more poignant. There's a whole thing about, he talked very eloquently about getting into Jasmine's position, his wife of 3 decades who loved him and held the center for him when everyone else didn't really know what to make of him, even as close as the Kithki. So, all of that's like really in my mind. And unfortunately, we had Kratos had us in 2 tabs. I saw it. Unfortunately, I'm gonna turn the gain up a bit and see if how that. So, Justin, let me know if it starts degrading the sound quality. Yeah, so fortunately we had some technical issues toward the end of that, but Corey's going to see what he can do with cleanup, and I think the most important parts are there nonetheless. So with that in mind, if any of that interests y'all, check out, that's our 4th episode on X Spaces, on AfterDarke X Spaces edition, and this is the 5th one, just kind of on the main YouTube channel. Or premiering, I should say, on the main YouTube channel. So I'm gonna talk about I want to talk about handling player character death from the GM perspective. But first, I wanted to see if Kratos, did you have any comments, questions, concerns about the last session? Is there anything you wanted to add? Or Corey, if there's anything you want kind of for, the written record that you wanted to discuss before I kind of started riffing on the GM stuff. Okay, awesome. Great. Corey says they'll publish it to the YouTube podcast channel in a few days. Feel free to jump in and I'll go back and forth. These work best as a dialogue. So in that context, Justin, since you don't get to, technically you're in the chat, you're running the chat, but really you're producing the show when we're, on Tuesday nights.
Yeah. No, I was barely able to keep up with the chat when you guys are doing the fight scenes. It's I'm constantly switching between camera views these days.
Yeah.
So
no,
yeah,
it's pretty intense with the battle cam going and all of that. Kratos wrote, not in particular, aside from I agree with everything that you said about Merick. Oddly enough, I think his death was fitting for both the setting and the themes. No, I do. I mean, Randy put it best that he rolled a nat 20 on going out. Like Merick, that was the best version of him. It was a vastly better end to his tale than if like the shadows had eaten him a couple episodes earlier or something. I mean, there's a place for nihilism and there's a place for just the world is harsh and it gets you, but that narratively and just emotionally, that's not a satisfying end to a character ever. When it's just some random encounter kind of, stupid thing that happens. And this is coming from the guy who's like a staunch proponent of anybody can die at any time. Justin, you and I have debated this many times over the years, about character death and the appropriateness. And even I would, concede that it's not, I think it's very important that any character can die at any time, important enough that I'm willing to take the narrative hit, but I don't like taking the narrative hit. It's not like, I want the characters to die in meaningless, random ways.
Right.
That's a great.
I think I would protest the, I was crossing the street and got run over problem. But I actually, my 2 cents on Merick's death is that I know it wasn't probably easy for Corey to kind of sit through that experience because no one wants to see their character go. But in terms of, I feel like at this point, we know that character death can be a very real thing, and it always sort of feels like there's like 3 ways to sort of save a character from dying in a lot of games, even streaming games, and even even understanding that there's actually a financial sort of component to characters. I mean,
Yeah.
the artwork has to be done, the music has to get created.
Yep.
I mean, there's actually stuff going on that the stakes are real, and I think that it makes those fight scenes and the battles really mean something when people actually survive them and triumph in particular, right? Because it doesn't feel like it was just sort of, it's not like the characters were signing their name to the pre-written outcome or something like that. It
Not at
feels
all.
like it makes it feel real. So as much as as much as generally speaking, I don't want to see characters bite it in some sort of meaningless way. It does mean that it's precious to basically have characters survive and to make good choices and knowing that knowing that their survival is actually not something that's guaranteed just because they're players. So yeah,
No,
yeah.
I think those are all really good. I think those are all really good observations. Corey wrote, looking forward to you touching on how you prepare as a GM to support different players and their experiences with character death. I actually have been thinking about this too. Like, Corey's a veteran player, is a veteran human as well. Has lost characters before. He and I both see also Armageddon. That I would say, he and I see almost entirely eye to eye on character death, for against all the different conversations about it. So I check, I definitely checked in, but I knew you'd be okay, Core. Whereas like with younger players, both younger in the game and that like for as to gaming, and then also just younger chronologically, especially if they haven't had a lot of life experience and emotions are running hot or whatever. That's a different thing. And as I keep talking about it, I mean, at some point I just need to bite the bullet and do like a full 2-hour fat dive on the era of the protagonist that we're in now as gamers and just really blow that out. So I'm like, every time I reference that, here's the video, it's like explains all my thoughts on it. Here it is. I don't have to recapitulate it. But essentially in modern gaming, and I'm counting that from 2014 onward, since the Player's Handbook, since the 5th edition 5.0 edition came out, basically, and you maybe 4th edition as well, but definitely in 5th edition, because I don't really know 4th edition very well at all. There's an implicit promise that you are playing the main characters of the tale, and that you are playing and all the things that go with it. And specifically, you're not just playing the main point of view characters, but you're playing the protagonists of the tale. And that basically there'll be a lot of hardship, there'll be a lot to overcome, there'll be a lot of challenges, but the whole discussion around like balancing encounters and, narrative beats and, I might get some trouble for this, but safety tools with characters, like all of that revolves around the idea that you are the protagonists and that basically everybody kind of knows that good guys are going to win in the end. And that is never how I've approached gaming. I want the good guys to win in the end. Let me say that unequivocally, but there is no promise in any of my games. And I don't think Justin, Corey, Randy, I don't think anybody thinks that I'm promising you that you're going to win in the end. I think what I'm promising you is I'm going to tell a hell of a story, and I'm going to take you on quite the journey. But where that journey ends is not up for that is not set. The ink is not dry on that whatsoever. So that is like a fundamental difference that I see. I had a couple other points, but sorry, kind of all over there. And Justin, if you want to jump in at any point, feel free. I was I was going to kind of get into some of the specifics that I had noticed. So I kind of feel like there was a beautiful, organic, kind of natural story arc that started at about episode 24, definitely by 25, the infamous bend the knee, and that was the first time that the party fought Barolos and fought Constantine and fought these people who are awful. I mean, they're some of them were always bad. Some of them were twisted by the island, but by the time 60 years on, by the time the players found them, by the time the player characters found them, they were not good people. This is a psychotic bunch. And so the stakes were especially high out of character as well as in character, because this was the same force that had already thrashed and nearly killed all of the party before, so right. It's like really scary psychologically. Like that's really scary, even though that the characters are more powerful, like mechanically they're more powerful than what they were on round one. Like if I was a player, that would scare me, that would make me anxious about it. So I think, John was even like, I'll be interested to see what happens if Titus I'll be interested to see what happens if Titus and Barolos lock up, because Barolos ragdolled him last time.
Yeah.
So, as it happened, and again, not scripted, as it happened, because of Barolos was basically obsessed with extinguishing the light for a lot of different reasons, and is going after Marcus hardcore. And also you want to take the cleric down, because as long as the cleric is up, the party is up. It actually did wind up happening that way, where Titus actually wound up delivering the final blow, which is a little more cinematic than I would have liked,
Really?
No, it is, y'all, because it's a little, like, I pride myself on having a really gritty feel to it, and that shit just doesn't wrap up in a bow that way. But I'm like, well, that's the way it happens.
It was after a character death, so it didn't feel like it was just kind of scripted out or destiny or anything like that.
No, for sure. But like, I never want people to be like, oh, he's running the Hollywood tropes here,
Right.
Like,
sure.
Yep, the good guy leader and the bad guy leader have to lock up. I'm like, no, the bad guy leader is obsessed with taking out the thing that is shedding light on all of his moral failings over, the decades, and can't stand to be around him, as well as tactically understands, because the whole Titus just kept getting buffed, kicked up and or healed the first time they fought. So it's pointless to beat on essentially the pet, from an EverQuest situation.
Yeah.
Klados wrote, do you feel that players and or a GM seeing characters as protagonists as more of a positive, negative, or mixed bag kind of approach? Damn, that is that's a really good question. I know, Klados, by the way, I never want to hear or see you type that you have elementary questions. Again, I'm still going to tease you about that and rag on you from the first time that I did one of these, meandering GM broadcasts where you're like, my questions were elementary, comparatively. So I'm trying to be fair and balanced. No, I'm not Fox News. I'm trying to give this like a holistic answer. I came of age, obviously, well before the era of the protagonist, where you were playing the point of view characters. Really, that's what you were. Or if you were protagonist, it was little p. There were no guarantees. Call of Cthulhu, one combat round, whole party's dead. Half of you are insane, and the other half are eaten. Old school fantasy wargaming from the 70s. You take 3 points of damage to the throat, you're dead. Your throat's ripped out. You're done. You can be literally the best warrior in the world, and somebody gets in a lucky shot in your throat, and you're done. It's brutal. I mean, it's absolutely brutal. It also makes combat really scary, and it makes it so that you do all the things that people do in real life who want to live. You lie like a mofo, you ambush people, you bribe people, you avoid towns where people don't like you. It's like you do all the things. It's like you don't know how that crap's going to turn out. And I love that, and I feel like that edge makes storytelling more powerful. It also makes the lack of that edge make certain stories impossible to tell. So you cannot tell a war story like I'm doing right now if the storytelling doesn't have that kind of edge. Having said that, I think it really depends on, so I guess this is a mixed bag then. I would say it leans negative, the trend in modern storytelling, but I can see why it exists for sure. I think that if people need the experience of being, again, this word gets bandied about, but I'm using this unironically, empowered, and they need to feel what it is they need to feel triumph. They need to feel even exaltation. Like, those are all wonderful things for human beings to feel. And I don't want to poop on anybody's, reasons for gaming and all of that. Those just are not the stories that I'm telling. And that is not the promise that I'm giving. The promise, when you sit down at my table, the promise that I'm giving is that I'm going to seriously examine these characters that you have brought before me and into the world that I have created. And we are going to tell a story we're going to go on a journey that is greater than any one of us. Or if I'm doing my job, any three of us, if it's a full table, could tell as individuals or as a smaller group. That's really, and I've actually never said that. I've never said that before, like explicitly that way. I've never thought of it quite that way. So thank you, Corey. I mean, I was really moved by what you said earlier tonight, and it got me thinking even just in the couple minutes in between. Yeah, so, not counting the Age of Tezcatli episodes, because they are connected, but they're not in the main continuity except through Nalishli and then how that information is spreading, though. It's also interesting to see Tatiana playing Wasted differently now that she's tasted Okatla and embodied Okatla. I think she's a stronger player for it, for sure. Different, more versatile. But 15 episodes later, from 25 to, no, not quite 15, because it was 37 that we just got done with. So I guess 12 dozen episodes. Oh, yeah, because it's the Age of Tezcatli stuff. So, dozen episodes later, you kind of have this very tight arc within an arc, because the whole becoming arc starts much earlier, and it didn't end until this fight. But you have this like Morolus as the antagonist situation going on. Even though if you went back and you looked at it, he actually has very little screen time. It's just he's felt as a presence more, but he only appeared in like 2.5, basically.
Yeah. Well, his effects were long lasting with Donnie in particular.
But the effects were long.
Yeah,
that's a really good, and yes, and I was really glad that Donnie opted to incorporate that, and this is not, he and I do not discuss any of those things. I never tell him like you need to hit these beats or anything. It's like I trust him with that character. I've given him that character. Oh, good, it makes sense, Claytos. Good. About the kind of protagonist, good, bad, or mixed bag. Yeah. So actually, I'm gonna pause here. What has it looked like and felt like from your side, Justin? Like the last dozen episodes or so on the island. Is there anything that's kind of struck you? Like the characters to me have grown hugely as characters.
They have. They've had to work much closer as a group. There's, Geramentum is kind of a safety net in many ways. And they're basically they've got that home field advantage, at least, for the time being. But yeah, once they left the island, the city, they kind of found themselves out of their depth, I think. And um, from my perspective, I feel like the initial confrontation was
It's rough.
I feel like it was they kind of underestimated the antagonist or the enemy, or however you want to think of them. And I think it was worth the effort to kind of go through that experience, because they approached them very differently as things went along. I don't know that they would have tried so hard to kind of keep them locked out of the chapel and whatnot had they not had that initial encounter.
I think I'm almost sure you're right.
I think they're much closer. I mean, nothing bonds like shared trauma.
Shared adversity. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I do. They do feel different. And I think, I think some of the occult stuff kind of, maybe brought out a lot of Tatiana's, role play chops, as it were.
And her resourcefulness.
Marcus as a character has really shined. I mean, he always felt like almost like a backseat character in many ways, because he was kind of there. He was starting to kind of, bring out sort of these plans about getting his people involved and whatnot. So you could definitely see that was happening. But I mean, he definitely sort of came to his own out here on the island. And it's interesting because to some degree, the proprieties of station don't really mean anything out here. And so they had to work together in a much more, I don't know, friendship style approach to things. And so it really forced them to grow, I think. So yeah, they feel like it feels like they've grown up some as a group.
They have, I mean, my God, in Nalishli's case, almost literally, she doesn't even feel like the same character in a great way. As when they got there. I can see the pathway, it's a coherent character, but like, she feels like 5 years older in experientially and maturity wise, maybe 10 than when they first got there. That character's come just a ridiculous way from eating dandelions because she wants the sensory experience. I mean, like the infant putting everything into his mouth just to have the experience. I'm going to answer. I want to answer these questions, and then I'll get to the promise of the title here. Speaking of promises, yeah. So Klados had asked, I know, Angel, you've said before that no one is the antagonist of their own story. This is true. Everybody thinks they're the hero. Do you ever write characters to be specifically villains despite that? I definitely write characters who I know are going to be anathema to the players. So the primate, I don't think this is a big spoiler. Like the primate of Leptis Regium, not a good dude. There is a reason that he has climbed the church ladder and maintained his spot at the top of the hierarchy, at least in that area of the continent, for a good long while. And it's not because he's a nice guy. The magistrate major of Leptis Regium, essentially the governor of Leptis Regium, again, everything that he stands for, he's eyeballs deep in the slave trade. He's fabulously wealthy. And he is formidable as an individual. And actually Randy's, I don't know if Randy's ever said this if Marcus has ever said this on stream. The players may not even know this, but he actually did meet him once in Pollux. So he got a taste of what that character is like. And so I write these characters knowing that just basically you don't have to make them villains. You set them up, Klados, in a way that it's going to be in their DNA. The conflict's going to be inevitable because it's going to run headlong into something that players are going to do. And that's drama. Conflict is the engine of fiction. So you build it in, and that way you never have to do anything artificial with them. You just play the damn characters, and they will generate conflict, just pursuing their agenda. Corey, you saw it with the conflicts of rank between Merick and Titus versus equals in a fellowship. Ask versus show versus tell. I mean, no, it's for sure. So Kledos, hopefully that's a useful answer for you. No, it's really interesting because the characters are like they're in, and deliberately so, they're in this liminal space on the island. They're in a space where they're not wholly detached from home. They presumably will get back to Germentum at some point, so those relationships still are important. The customs and ranks and status and all that are still important, but they're on the island and they're actively adventuring in the field. So unlike so many, like the typical groups, there is someone who is the quote unquote social superior in the group. And then you kind of have to work out where that relationship ends, and then the fellowship begins, where it's a group of equals. Maybe Titus is the primus inter pares, maybe he's the first among equals, maybe not. Maybe it's a different character. Certainly depending on the situation. Good. Okay, good. I'm glad it's helpful, Kledos. Okay, so character death. Now, I have done a kind of a GM's journey on this before, but I feel like it's worth revisiting in here. And they're basically two schools of thought, and this is on a continuum. This is not a binary. But if you were going to take the one extreme example, it would be anybody can die at any time for any reason. That last part is really important. So I would say, Justin, the homebrew D&D campaign was a perfect example of that. Your character very nearly expired because you got your ankle trapped in some rocks and a bunch of rando villagers were kicking you to death. And that was nearly the end of your character.
That was absurd. For the record, it was one bad roll, like literally after another, and it was just okay.
You were rolling nat ones like
it was nuts.
Right. It was. Yeah. There was another incident that was actually as bad or worse on the rolls, but you had so many more hit points then, and numbers to help you.
Yeah, the trap, the spike trap thing.
Oh my God. I was like, and you were like, I'm going to roll myself to death down in here, and I'm like, I don't think so, but it could. Like, you would have been hella dead if you were not a relatively higher level,
right?
And then even then, it was like a full part. It was like a full all hands on deck. We have to rescue Maddie out of the pit, sort of thing.
Those were absurd, but it was just like, okay.
It's like, I guess we're doing this. And so that, I mean, truly any character could die at any time. Characters tended to die. I will say characters still tended to die at epic moments. Kledos talking about his character in the home Leptis Regium campaign, or the public Leptis Regium campaign, where his character Agrippa nearly drowned after rolling 3 nat ones in sewage. It's like, yep, that can happen in my games. You can just like
a truly crappy death.
A truly crappy death, indeed. But the characters would tend to die. Josh's character dying to the strong right hand of Medici, of like one of the big bads of the campaign, and taking him out in the process. But then you had another character who will remain nameless unless they choose to reveal themselves, another player with a certain who went berserk on the town guard and decided that they were going to backstab 10 guardsmen until they had 40 guards descend on them. Like just random. I guess that's Grand Theft Auto level. I don't really know the game, but I've seen some clips. It reminds me of running around in Vampire the Masquerade and just fighting with the police in the video game. and you don't even get gear from the police. It's just like, or not police, hunters. I guess the police too, both of them. Anyway, the point being that that's like a completely dumb death. It's just, you know, you're not going to fight all of the law enforcement in Santa Monica, you know, like with your bare fangs. So it's not the point of the game anyway. And then all the way over to, and I've kind of alluded to this, that characters, there's kind of the unwritten contract, or sometimes occasionally even the explicit contract, that characters only die during narratively, well, the extreme would be they only die during like the high narrative moments, the end of the campaign, maybe the halfway point to the campaign. That kind of, yeah, Corey knows exactly what I'm talking about because he was there for that session. And that generated all kinds of issues and problems for all kinds of characters following that, because said law enforcement was not happy at having one of their men gutted and then having to chase the criminal down. And then all of that character's associates became imperiled. But, you know, I would say that, Justin, I would describe your position as not at the extreme end of that. I don't know, maybe 75% of the way down that spectrum or something. And I'm probably 25%. Like if 0 is anybody can die at every time and 100 is, you know, and 100 is you can only die at high, you know, at high narrative moments.
They have plot armor.
Yeah, I would say, I would characterize your position as like you want to see characters only die when it's narratively, when it has like true narrative impact. Is that a fair?
I think that's mostly fair. You know, I think so. This is a little bit out of the realm of realism, I suppose. But I think if the goal is, I don't know, character growth and good story development and sort of like, I don't know, if not the moral of a story, at least sort of like the goal of a story is to kind of unfold to some sort of a conclusion or some sort of point. It seems as though character death at any random moment kind of puts all of that in jeopardy, not just the character itself. And so, it's a little, I don't know. I think sometimes people want to play and want to get away from, you know, normal life. And, you know, I mean, and the reality is that we can all die in a car wreck tomorrow kind of problem.
Sure. Or, I mean, I've had friends who had a, you know, God forbid, had a freaking aneurysm.
Right.
I mean, just literally just laying in bed, had an aneurysm. And this was a person who was in, you know, quite good shape and, you know, ran and took care of herself and all that. It's like, nope, it just had an aneurysm.
I do have an adjacent question for you on this topic.
Sure. Just one quick one on there. There also is a difference in that between a home game. And this isn't a rebuttal or anything. It's just kind of, it's interesting to me that there's a difference between a home game and a streaming game, at least potentially, in that the home game, I feel like escapism is much more like immediate, because obviously there's not an audience. So you're telling a story for the people in the room, period.
Right.
So the escapism to me is a much stronger factor. I maybe my intuition's wrong on this, but I feel like a streaming game, it has more of a what happens next. Not that is absent, but like the audience is.
There's more people invested in what happens next.
But they want to see what happens next, and it's like a soap opera or a really good sci-fi book or, you know, something like that. And right. So both are present in both, but I feel like the ratio, and I haven't explored this yet really, but just my gut is that the ratio is somewhat different. And so you could get away with, you could have things happen one way or the other that wouldn't necessarily work in a home game and a stream game and all that. So that's a different discussion, but I wanted to note that. Anyway, go ahead. You said you had an adjacent one.
Yeah. it kind of involves the question of faith and by sort of some extension destiny, as it were. Um, and I guess in the kind of the real world, there's really like no evidence that God or gods or whatever are influencing our lives. In a D&D game, there's very real evidence that those sort of things occur, and it's
There's incontrovertible evidence, unless you just
right,
want,
right, and right. And so it's kind of it seems like an interesting juxtaposition to say that there is no sort of character, I don't know, favoritism, sort of by the fates or by the or whatever, when those things do exist. It's an interesting. I'm sort of curious, like, do you feel like that's a thread that you want to I don't know, narratively thread, or is that not really, like the gods care about their own thing, but people are not necessarily on that list or checklist, with maybe a possible exception of one or two? I mean, how do you how do you sort of, I guess the point of the question there is, when obviously the gods do exist in an incontrovertible way, but there's no, even their champions don't seem to basically have any sort of protection there or whatever, from a, I don't know, plot or storyline perspective. I don't know. Is that something you think about very often, or is that not really? I'd like to get your perspective on that. I guess is where I'm going with this.
I mean, Zach summed up my approach to this campaign beautifully. Times are tough. Times are hard. The people are harder. And that, so essentially you're given a certain tool set. By, Marcus was the first. Oh, actually, that's not true. His son was the first, but Marcus was the first on a, his son Livius was the first, because he made the run up to Geramentum in the first place for help. But of the people who have it, basically on at will or constantly, Marcus was the first. Now, after a tremendous journey, I would say, Titus is the second who has it. So, but as mighty as, say Tuea is, I'm going to try to avoid getting too into the metaphysics of this. I guess so the standard way that D&D kind of approaches this, and I don't know, I'm not sure if this is going to answer the question or not, Justin, but the standard way that D&D approaches it is kind of like there's so many gods and all of them are trying to influence the world, and so this one is pushing it this way and this one is pushing it the other, and basically it's a wash. That's an oversimplification, but it's essentially kind of the how they think of polytheism, which is not really polytheism, but anyway, that's a whole other discussion. So because in D&D they basically have like a monotheist, it's like a polytheistic world, but with a monotheistic attitude, like with a modern monotheistic attitude. Whereas like in historical ancient Rome, when you wanted your crops to go well, you pray to Ceres. When you were traveling over the ocean, you pray, et cetera, et cetera. It's like you had different, if you're victory in battle, you pray to Mars. You were agnostic. Actually, ironically enough, it was like whoever was running the show, and that
you worship the pantheon, not one.
You worship the pantheon, exactly. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. You worship the pantheon, and sure, you can have your favorites, but there's no fighting about who's better or that these other gods don't exist or whatever. At least, typically, and again, that's kind of an oversimplification of it. But so in my view, and the kind of in Terra and the current view, it's more like the gods have been quite distant for some time for various reasons, and not for the same reason necessarily. There is a pattern to it. I'm gonna forbear saying what that pattern is right now, but there is a pattern to it. Part of the journey of the characters, if they want to, and Randy's already kind of hot on the trail of this, although not necessarily playing the best character for it, ironically enough. Randy in real life loves to play a lore master, but Marcus is not. Marcus is focused on his family and his community, first and foremost. He's curious. He's definitely curious, but he's not a natural lore master, he's whereas other characters that Randy have played have been more natural fits for that. So if they want to try to figure that pattern out, that's fine, but you don't have to be successful in this campaign. So you actually don't have to answer the questions that you're putting to me to be successful in the campaign, even though I know most of the answers to those. And the last thing I'll say on that is that they're given a tool set, but what they do with that tool set and how successful they are with that tool set is up to them and their fortunes. Is kind of how I'm looking at it. There'll be some choices down the road, which will further inform that and flesh that out. I know of at least 2 of them that I'm looking at as the game master, that I'm looking at and I'm kind of mentally and also narratively preparing for. I don't know exactly when they're going to happen, but I think I can see where these characters are going, and I think I know what's going to happen. Marcus is much further along in his journey. It was really hard for Randy as a player when it was revealed that Quail-a-thon was not Quail-a-thon, that it was actually Tuea. It was really hard for him,
Yeah, that's there's a lot to unfold there.
It was shocking. I mean, it was shocking.
When he presumably when they all get back home and it's like, hey, guess what, guys?
Oh,
that's
yeah. To my earlier point about you bake the conflict into the DNA of the story. Hello, burning you at the stake as a heretic. So, he's much further along that journey though. Titus has just started walking that path. It's not the same path, but he has just started walking his path as a holy warrior. Where in another world, in another D&D setting, it'd be called a paladin. And that's like a profound thing. And he's also just younger than Marcus and not nearly as wise. And so, and I'm not just talking stat wise, there are many challenges ahead for him. So I don't know if that answered your question or not, but that's kind of where my head is at anyway.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to, I think it's important to kind of draw out the fact that there are no sort of protections, even though people sort of, from our perspective, they're the good guys, and it's like, well,
right.
why aren't these deities interceding in their behalf, or what? What's the deal here? Why aren't they? I mean, the gods obviously exist, so why aren't they helping? So I just think that that's a good thing to kind of put out on the table.
They are helping, just not the way you want them to. So in dealing with character death from a GM perspective, so there's I'll be quick on this because I don't want to run too much over, but I do want to give some substance. So first off, there's the out of character understanding. You want to set the expectations. It's so important. You have to set the expectations. Dragna has a formal contract with his players when he's going to run them through Curse of Strahd. I've never done that before, but that isn't necessarily a bad idea, especially in this era, especially if the players are thinking of themselves as the protagonist with a capital P. Like, you definitely want them to understand this is the context of this story. So whatever you decide, you everybody kind of at the table wants to be clear. Like, everybody knew going into this, we're telling a war story. There are going to be casualties. I mean, I even think I said it basically. That's basically verbatim. Maybe I said there will very likely be casualties, but I mean, I was clear from the beginning that all of these characters are not going to make it through. And by the way, we're nowhere near finished with the campaign. There can definitely be more deaths out of the Fellowship. There could even be a TPK. I mean, there almost was on episode 25. We were 2 bad rolls away from that, or we were 1 Randy blundering his speech away from that. I mean, that was bad. That was really bad. So the out of character stuff is honestly because I see a lot of videos, Justin, about the in character stuff and how to handle like what to do with TPKs and you know, it's like, no, the more difficult conversation is the out of character conversation. Are people going to be, you know, so like I said earlier, you know, Corey's a veteran player, veteran human. I wouldn't worry, but like if Tatiana lost her character, I would really want to check in with her. I would really want to help her process if she needed to. She may not, you know, she may not. She may be perfectly, you know, she'd be sad, but you know, maybe perfectly satisfied depending on how that happened. Hey, Tobes, depending on how that happened, but I don't want to assume that because this is her first campaign. You know, she's never gamed before. And until you've lost a beloved character that you have sunk literally hundreds of hours, most video games are over in 25, 30 hours, even like really immersive ones, like the Mass Effect games, you can finish those. You can play through the whole trilogy in under 100 hours. Well under 100 hours. You know, at this point, she's been playing that character for a hot minute. And we have gone places emotionally that she didn't even know we were going to go. So I would want to check in with that person. And from a, well, you know, yes, Tobias makes reference to an unfortunate incident in the homebrew. Yeah, his character got sick.
Sometimes you miss a couple of con checks, and then Specularum becomes a necropocalyptic ruin.
Yes, it does. Whose chief export is what, Tobias? So yeah, I'll never get that note that he wrote in character will always be funny to me. Yeah, so if you're playing something like Curse of Strahd, where it's basically baked in that some character sometime is going to die, you want to have backup characters. You know, it's not a requirement, but that's my advice. You want to have backup characters. We're still kind of working through that first run, but I do want to have backup characters in Curse of Strahd pretty soon. As the GM, you do want to understand how the story would continue on. You want to have some idea of how the story would continue on. So like, I've always known what would happen if Titus drops in one of these fights, because he's a martial character. He's the lead from the front by design character. There's always a chance he goes down, and the story's not going to end just because he dies. You know, even though we might be forgiven for thinking that he was the main character. If this was a typical book, you know, he's kind of presented in a lot of ways as the main character, but he's not. It's an ensemble cast, and others will rise, and they will do what they need to do. And it is not necessarily the good timeline, but they're not just going to lay down and die because one person dies. That's not these characters, I don't think. I was telling Corey in between that brief break that all of these characters, in response to a question he put to me, all of these characters have, all the characters of the Fellowship embody the two main themes of the campaign. They all have aspects of that baked, you know, within them, which is sacrificing in the indomitability of the human spirit. Some more obviously than others. Nalishli is the only quasi-exception to that, in that she is learning those things. She's learning what sacrifice is. She's learning what it is to be resilient, to have incredible resilience in the face of true difficulty and true pain. So those are some things to keep in mind when you're thinking about that. TPKs are a little total party kills. Back in the day, I would have called them party wipes. That's still kind of how I think of them, but you know, they're known as TPKs now. Those are a little bit different, but not really. The big difference with those, because you still have to make new characters, you still want to check in with your players, you still want to make sure that you understand how this impacts the story. The big shift is you are now going to have a point of view shift. That's really the additional layer on a total party kill. So because we have the prospect of a TPK, I already had an idea, but I really had to flesh that out. So I know it'd be a bit of a scramble, but I think and I'm not saying I want to do this, Justin, but I believe that we could be back on the next week. Like, if God forbid, if the party got wiped, I actually think we could be on next week, at least from a GM perspective. Production wise, maybe not, or maybe they just deal with having a much more generic intermission, for a while, because now you're dealing with the production and the supply chain of getting minis and all of that. But narratively, it's there, and obviously you don't have to do that's issues for a streaming game, but that's not, you don't have to presumably deal with that in a home game. Is there? Okay, so I know I'm kind of blitzing through that because we got I got us off on some other areas. Hopefully, though, they're of use. Toby or Klados or Corey or Justin, for posterity's sake, is there any other question that you want to ask about dealing with character death, or any times where your characters have died with me, or that you want to talk about, or anything else here as we're coming up on time? I'm willing to go a little bit long, but I want to be respectful of everybody's time.
I've certainly lost my share. They're all tough. Actually, I've been on the other end of that too. I don't know if you recall. So you were playing as a character in one of my short-lived games, and Sarah and you basically were running a couple of characters, and there was this scene that kind of played itself out, and you guys were basically facing off against these, I can't remember what you guys were fighting at this point, but your two characters just weren't really like meshing well in terms of like tactics and things of that nature. And the NPC at the time, bit it. And it was like, wow, I really had no intention of having this character die, but
I remember
that was tough. And it felt honest, but I can tell you as a GM, it's kind of like, oh wow, okay. Even as a GM, you sort of feel like I don't know how you feel about this, but I sort of feel a little bit protective in some ways of even just especially the NPCs that are sort of like party bound or sort of part of the group. I get that. But by that same token, I think you'd said that it felt much more impactful that sort of thing had happened. And so I guess, the gist here is that, regardless of how you feel about how warranted or even, I don't know, expected something like death can be at sort of any moment, it can really change things. And I think the important thing to play out from there is make it matter, right? Even, it's, I think when you were interviewing Donnie, he had said something in like, if I leave this character, all of a sudden it'll be his twin brother Midas, and it's like it'll be the scar will be on the other side of the face or something, right? Or just whatever the deal was. I think one of the things that I am hopeful for, I don't want to say looking forward to, but just something where I'm, some of the most moving things that have happened in the last session was the discussions around Merick and his loss, and seeing the impact that's going to have. And really, more than anything else, this story, I think, is going to benefit from the fact that those deaths and those things happening really matter to the people that are still alive. And to me, it feels like that's where the core of what this story is kind of about, kind of the message that you're trying to convey, can really shine. So looks like we have a couple of people.
Yeah. I'll try to be succinct, because like I said, I know we're at time here, but I don't want to kill the conversation when we have some some important stuff. I mean, Justin, I think you basically answered Klatos's question, really. So it's just like, you know, in real life, and I would say I've definitely seen more death than the good majority of Americans have. It's not, the important thing is not necessarily even how they died, like especially if it's sudden or it seems senseless, or in my case, somebody gets blown up by some improvised explosive device, and that's it. That, because that's real life. Like there's no GM to complain to. There's no, it's just, it's done. And the important thing is that you remember how that person lived. Now that's in real life, at least for me, that was really important for me. And that's what I chose to focus on. And whereas like in a fictitious setting, if they die, like say somebody dies to a random encounter, right? The important thing isn't, oh, it sucks that, they died to, a bunch of zombies or whatever. It's you really want to bring, I think Toby, thank you, Toby. That's quite a compliment, by the way. Angel makes the weight of loss palpable when governing a scene. I almost hate to say it, but it feels like a sort of Nen aura. You want to make sure that you have the emotional heft there. And like you were saying, Justin, you want it to, hello, Alex, how are you doing?
And welcome, Nelazi, I think.
And good old Nelazi, good old Void Mage. So from Armageddon. Yeah, you want to kind of, and you got too many thoughts in my head. You need to set the state. You need to kind of lead by example as a GM. You need to make sure that you're vulnerable. You need to make sure that there's trust at the table. All of those things, like those are true for any kind of like real emotional life going on at the table. It needs to be okay for people to talk about like how that character's death is going to impact them. Donnie did a very good job with. I mean, he went right in there. He really emoted how his character was feeling, and he gave permission if they needed it for the other characters to experience that. And I saw them, like I saw people just taking their cues from that, right? So it was like, okay, Nilishli was like somber but still totally on point. Doesn't really understand exactly what's going on, but knows that she has to push through, and it's now more important that she's protecting everybody because there's now one of the protectors is dead, and that's like a big deal. The elusive Justin, yes, indeed. And it's one of the reasons I love these nights. I saw, Marcus like really expand in response to Merick's death and be like extra compassionate and extra gentle and just really present for everybody as they were there. And then I saw Wesa revert in a sense, or that's not a good enough word, but she grabbed for some of her deepest and first training in her culture, which is you compartmentalize it. You take the pain, you put it here, and it doesn't exist because you have to get through. This is how we survive. And then at the end of that, maybe you open that box, maybe you don't. Whether or not that's healthy, whether that's whatever, but I mean, that is how the character has been trained. And that is how her culture deals with times of extreme danger. And if you notice how Wesa was like downright cold for the rest of that session. She was nothing like how she normally is in character. She was more like Okatla, without the relish to it. I mean, but she was downright cold, and that was really striking to me. So the short answer, Klatos, is to allow the emotional impact and to really show the emotional impact and invite the emotional impact. Rather than the pointlessness of the death itself, which can also be like bitterly, like have impact in a bitter, ironic sort of way. Okay, let me get this one here. So Nalazi is just getting here. but how does Ken, not sure, bleed over into the rest of the table? I try to compartmentalize it, but it always bleeds over, making many of my responses sharper than I intended. Bleed is the thing for sure. I'm going to go with trauma. If you will repost that, Nalazi, I would let that's a chunky one. Some people would argue that we're playing for bleed. I don't necessarily agree with that, but bleed is not in and of itself is not a bad thing. It becomes an issue when it actually derails or distorts the story you're telling. And that I don't know if this is necessarily good advice, but I really just try to kind of method my way into a character and get into that headspace and that emotional space. A lot of times when that happens, the bleed becomes you're kind of jujitsuing the bleed, like you use it as fuel, and it sends you down the path of that character more than like you're being at war at yourself. That is not a very well constructed answer, but I hopefully that makes sense. If not, maybe that's something I can turn. Hit me up or a comment or something, and get that. Take another bite at that apple, and I'll do so on my end and see if I can come up with a better answer.
Just for posterity's sake, anyone watching this video, they're referring to bleed in and bleed out, I believe, which is where real world influences the game and vice versa.
Thank you, Justin.
So things that happen in the game can influence, people at the table or outside of that or what have you.
That's true, Corey. So Toby asked, how do you navigate player expectations versus GM reality? How often have you found yourself needing to realign a player's perspective, and how often do they realize it's happening? That's, I can give you a bare bones answer to that, because a substantive answer to that would take longer than we have left. I'm pretty sneaky. I've been doing this a hot minute. I can read people pretty well, and I understand human dynamics well. So not often that they realize it's happening. But more importantly, as I've gotten older, I just don't have the energy to play to necessarily be go the subtle route all the time. So, if I need to, then I might have a conversation with them about it. Having my version of a session zero, where you're setting expectations, it does wonders. It's just so important. And as many dings as I've as many like slaps of criticism as I've aimed at the era of the protagonist that we're currently in, that is one hugely positive thing that's come out of this era. The level setting that is kind of formalized in the rituals of session zero now. My approach to it was a lot more circuitous, and it was through like individual prologues and then linking those up. And you kind of like implied what the expectations were. The person got to like feel, and people would be like, this isn't really for me. And be like, yeah, that's cool. Before they hit the main campaign. Talking about navigating player expectations versus GM reality, though, that's a whole conversation, Toby. In fact, if you could carve out the time, Torikun, you too could be invited on this, and then there could just be three heads on this, couldn't there, Justin?
Absolutely.
There could be some more people jumping in on this, and we could have a conversation on that. You, Toby, are a super thoughtful and reflective player, and I would love to talk about that with you. So I'll actually put a pin in that. Okay. Y'all, good. No, I'm glad it was helpful. Alex, I don't even get to see your glorious bald pate and matching beard. It was just a ships in the night here, but I'm glad you stopped by. Thank you so much, y'all, for giving us the gift of your time. It's definitely appreciated. And go and if there's anything else, I'm still kind of actively on the comments on episode 37. If there's anything related to Merick's death or talking about character, player character death and how you deal with that, Alex, obviously I would love your perspective on how you navigate that. Absolutely, friend. I miss y'all.
Get you on one of these too, Alex.
Yeah, no, we should. I would, there has definitely been character death in your first campaign. I know that. So, and you've had some narrative choices about how to navigate that. And I would put to you, as someone who grew up, in gaming in the era of the protagonist, I would be really interested. Aw, honey. He said I cry a lot, in parentheses. And that's very sweet of you too. Alex said constructive chaos, always enlightening to get your perspective on this stuff. I would love to see where you landed on it back then, like when you very first started as a GM, and then if that's the same place that you're on with it now. I would say, Justin, I've modified a little bit toward your direction, a little bit. I'm not hardcore. Anybody can die at any time for any reason anymore. Because remember, I grew up like in fantasy wargaming. It was a normal, like you rolled for illness every, I think it was every month. Might have been every 2 weeks. Like in the field, maybe it was every 2 weeks, and then if you were in town, every month. And like your character could just die. It wasn't often, like it wasn't easy. These are like tougher than these are, tough survivor characters or whatever. You're not just playing random farmer, but
disease was rampant and plague was everywhere.
It's a historical. Yeah, I mean, it's like plague would sweep through, and you'd have to make some checks, man. And your character could permanently lose in that game. It's endurance. You could permanently lose. Appearance points for getting pockmarks. I mean, it was a rough. And that was me at 8 years old. This is what was absorbing into my brain of this is how you tell a story.
And certainly a lot more to. So certainly a lot more to unpack than we have time for. But I mean, we were playing in a systems. Even older D&D systems were much more lethal. Yeah, I mean, it was save or die. I mean, it was just that was common.
Save or die, and that's it, and that was the end of the character. And especially like if undead drained you down, like there's no resing, you're just dead. It's bad. It's bad. Every time you resed, your con dropped by 1 permanently. Like, it was a different era. It's a different mentality. And Alex says, I really feel like I mourn for these characters as much as the players do. I really have to struggle through those feelings because so I'm not being unrealistic. I mean, no, you care. You care, and you're obviously invested in it, and that's one of the qualities of an excellent GM. I mean, God, how many times have I, cried on stream? It's a thing. I would never not want to be that person, even if it's embarrassing sometimes. Well, I could just yammer on this forever, but I will actually leave it there. Mwah. Thank you guys. Thank you, Corey, for your insight, and your trust earlier when we were doing the I think of it as a podcast on X, and I will see y'all later on this project of Darkeport. Vale, and take care.